On this week's edition of Politicat, we'll look at the 2016 presidential election, where Donald Trump has become the last GOP candidate standing, discuss the significance of political advertisements, and talk about London's history-making mayoral election. This is Politicat, your political news right now. Good evening and welcome to Politicat. I'm Eric Miller and I'm joined tonight by Dominic Burke to talk about who else, Donald Trump, and later I'll be talking to KK Doyle about political ads in this year's election. With Ted Cruz and John Kasich out of the race, Donald Trump is officially the only remaining GOP presidential candidate. But with only Trump remaining, the Republican Party is more fragmented than ever. Prominent Republicans like Jeb Bush and Mitt Romney are refusing to support him, and Speaker of the House Paul Ryan has claimed he is not yet ready to support Trump. Some are worried that this intra-party fighting may cost the Republicans their shot at the Oval Office in 2016. I'm now joined by former NU College Republicans President Dominic Burke. Dominic, welcome back to the show.
Hi, Eric.
Now, so Dominic, Paul Ryan recently said he's waiting to endorse Donald Trump until the candidate provides some evidence that he shares the Republican Party's values. Now, what do you think Ryan's hesitation tells us about the current state of the GOP?
Well, I think Ryan's hesitation shows us the conflict between ideas and rhetoric that is really attacking, perhaps not the GOP, but conservatism right now, and the split between conservatism and the GOP. Paul Ryan, well known for years and years now as the GOP's ideas guy. He likes policy, he likes political ideas, he likes classical conservatism and what that means. What we've seen from Donald Trump doesn't necessarily fit those categories in any field, be it in trade, be it in his changing stances on immigration, on abortion over the years. So I think the concern isn't necessarily split in the GOP, but it's ideological conservatism versus Republican rhetoric.
Now, some Republicans, like Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell, have agreed to support Trump for the sake of party unity and to retain the Senate for the Republicans in 2016. Others, like former GOP presidential hopeful Lindsey Graham, refuse to support Trump because they question his allegiance to the party. Now, do you think these detractors will warm up to Trump by the general election, or could they be abstaining or even voting for presumed Democratic nominee Hillary Clinton, who some people have put forward as a moderate Republican?
Well, I think you hear a lot of people in the Republican Party right now saying, I'm not going to vote for Donald Trump, but I'm certainly not going to vote for Hillary Clinton either, which leaves a lot of questions. We heard Lindsey Graham warm up to Donald Trump a little bit today. He says, I'm still not endorsing him, but I'm not going to talk bad about him. I'm just going to keep my mouth closed now, but I'm not going to vote for him or Hillary Clinton. You hear that coming from a lot of Republicans, a lot of the establishment right, be them George W. Bush, Jeb Bush, George H.W. Bush, Mitt Romney. A lot of people kind of taking this rhetoric. We don't like Hillary. We don't think Donald Trump is a conservative. What are we supposed to do? Yeah.
And do you think that we could see perhaps the emergence of a third-party candidate? A number of outlets have suggested Gary Johnson, who's the Libertarian Party's guy. What do you think there?
Well, I think there will certainly be, even if there's not an additional third-party candidate, we're going to see Gary Johnson do much better than he would have otherwise if you had perhaps more likable candidates on the left or the right. In this election. I think I saw an early poll the other day, Gary Johnson already polling at 11% across from Trump or Hillary Clinton, and that's when you consider he got about 1% of the vote in 2012. So there's certainly room for another third-party candidate if they wanted to come in. It's not clear who that would be at this point, but regardless, you'll see some third-party candidate do well in this election.
Yeah. And assuming that the Republicans can't pull together by the time of the general, do you think that Trump can realistically win this election without party unity?
Well, it's interesting what I've been trying to say what Donald Trump can or can't do for about 8 months now with little success. But I think it's interesting. You see, Donald Trump saying now I don't need party unity is his recent answer, which is interesting. I mean, it would be hard for Donald Trump to win the entire country without the entirety of the right, let alone without the right. But then you see interesting things that just go to show us that 2016 is a crazy election year. I saw a poll the other day of likely Bernie Sanders voters in the primaries. Who are you more likely to support, Hillary Clinton or Donald Trump? In certain states, Trump beats Clinton by a lot. So what to say at this point, I don't know. But I don't think Donald Trump can count on a conservative bloc in the general.
And now that Trump is the only Republican candidate, we can expect to hear more discussions of his policy plans should he become president in 2016. And much of the discussion so far has centered on his fiscal policies. On Meet the Press this Sunday, Trump said, "I don't know how people make it on $7.25 an hour," and proposed a minimum wage increase at the state, not federal level. But he famously announced in a debate last year that wages were, quote, too high. Now, Dominic, what are your thoughts on this sudden policy shift?
Donald being Donald. Look, this is a man who, as late as fall of last year, supported socialized health care instead of Obamacare. This is a man that, throughout his life, has flipped positions on multiple times on abortion. Look, I think this isn't anything surprising for Donald. We've seen Donald just win what was a very populist, what turned out to be a very populist nomination, or will be. So his position isn't what Donald thinks or what the conservatives think or what the liberals think. It's what the public wants to hear, and that's what you're seeing here too. Donald playing the polls and deciding what sounds best at the moment. A lot of supporters who thought they could support him or thought they agreed with everything he said in the primaries might come to be a little disappointed in the general.
And Trump also announced a tax increase for the rich if elected. This too reflects a change in policy. He told ABC, quote, "On my plan, tax rates will go down, but by the time it's negotiated, they will go up." He backed away from this stance this week. So, Dominic, is this sort of more of the same? Is he just kind of tailoring his message to the audience?
Well, and yes, and the answer to that is I just want to point out we just talked about increasing taxes and increasing the minimum wage, and we're talking about the presumptive Republican nominee for president. This is all about shifting message. It's all about being populist. It's all attempting to appeal to kind of a white middle America who very, very much supported him to this point.
Okay. And on the other side of the race, two candidates remain, though Hillary Clinton's nomination is becoming even more certain. But like Trump, Clinton has her own detractors on the Democratic side. Now, Clinton and Trump have higher favorability ratings than any other presumptive nominee, or unfavorability ratings rather, than any other presumptive nominee in the past 10 presidential cycles, with Trump's disapproval ratings skyrocketing past 50%. Some have speculated this negativity stems from growing political polarization. What do you think about these claims?
I mean, I think that's pretty hard to argue with. You see both Bernie Sanders and Donald Trump fueled by it's not just rhetoric. To say it's rhetoric is one thing, but it's rhetoric that's anti-Washington, it's anti-government, it's anti-politician, it's anti-ideas that we've seen promoted for these parties for the last 30 years. So I think certainly you can say the unfavorability ratings, you kind of have this class of people who have always been represented by politics who now aren't represented by anybody. So it's very, very interesting to see.
Yeah. And do you think these ratings might have a broad effect in the general? Like, what are we going to see there?
Well, you'll see, as we talked about earlier, you're going to see a strong third-party candidate for the first time, probably since H. Ross Perot is the type of levels we're talking about. You're going to see a lot of undecideds, I would guess, up until the day of the election, which I think also helps a presumptive third-party candidate. Just a lot of kind of what we've been talking about for the last 8 months. Who knows what's going to happen? And that's what the unfavorability ratings do, is we're not going to know.
Okay. Well, Dominic, thank you very much, and we'll see whether some voters still feel like they're choosing the lesser of two evils come November. And coming up a little sooner, we'll take a look at the impact of political advertisements on elections and see why London's new mayor is making headlines.
At Northwestern, we're wildcats in every way.
Northwestern, break right through that. With our colors flying, we will cheer you all to go. Go you Northwestern, fight for victory, sweet victory, for the fame of our fair name, and go Northwestern, win that game. Go Cats!
At Northwestern University, we are pioneering innovation and achieving excellence across every imaginable discipline. Northwestern University, the possibilities are endless.
Media and advertising is one of the most important and elusive parts of the presidential campaign. Yet Donald Trump, the only remaining Republican candidate, has benefited from the relatively no-cost, almost non-stop media coverage that his campaign generated. NNN's Margaret Corden and Meredith Sonnefeld have more.
Advertising has figured prominently in American politics, with some of the most famous commercials including Reagan's Morning in America and Johnson's Daisy Girl. The former is a Republican icon, used by 2016 GOP candidates during this presidential election season to evoke a romantic notion of the resurgence of the American way of life. Daisy Girl only aired once, yet its controversial message that nuclear warfare disrupts childlike innocence is considered to have been instrumental in Johnson's 1964 victory over Barry Goldwater. Thus, as presidential candidates run ads to similarly sway voters before the general election this November, one candidate is benefiting from a low-cost approach. Republican Donald Trump has only paid for 4 officially released campaign commercials, valued at $8 million, or 1/3 of his total campaign expenditures to date. Trump's $8 million figure is 4 times as large as the amount allocated to other areas, such as strategy and research, with the exception of administrative costs, which cost $5.2 million. According to Open Secrets, President Barack Obama spent an estimated $724 million on his 2012 re-election campaign. Approximately 67%, or $484 million, went toward the media and advertising, with the remaining 33% going towards areas including fundraising, salaries, and administrative costs. While Democratic frontrunner Hillary Clinton is the only candidate to allocate the highest percentage of funds to campaign salaries, she has still spent $29.5 million on media. Like Trump, Clinton also receives press. However, this press typically covers scandals, such as the recent email scandal, while Trump's mostly covers his actions during the presidential run. This could be due in part to the fact that Clinton's political career began when she became the First Lady of Arkansas in 1979, while Trump's began when he announced his candidacy for president. The sheer fact that Clinton's political history is longer than Trump's provides the press with the opportunity to analyze her actions prior to her 2016 presidential run. Comparatively, Sanders has spent $42 million on media. Trump does not necessarily need to spend money on advertisements when he is a regular figure of the media spotlight. His various postings on social media, as well as various statements he releases, are typically the topic of most major news outlets the next day. Trump recently posted a photo on his Twitter account with the caption, quote, "Happy #Cinco de Mayo. The best taco bowls are made in Trump Tower Grill. I love Hispanics," end quote. His tweet was met with both support and criticism. Immigrants for Trump responded by posting a photo reinforcing Latino support for Trump. Others commented, quote, "He even built a wall around his taco. #Trump," end quote. He was quickly criticized by CNN, CNBC, Politico, and NBC. Following heavy media coverage of the photo, #Tacogate was created on Twitter, propelling his tweet and associated policies on immigration to a trending status. Meredith Sonnefeld, Politicat.
And Trump's taco tweet points to his relationship with the media. Many have argued that a vicious cycle has emerged. On one hand, the media frequently ridicules his comments while also providing free airtime. Several media outlets have acknowledged that this also includes a ratings boost when they do so, which keeps Trump in the spotlight. And we're now joined by KK Doyle, former Vice President of Form and Function Marketing. KK, thank you very much for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. So in the past, the political race has been a bit of a money game, with candidates pouring hundreds of millions of dollars into political ads. This year, it seems like it's been a little bit different, Trump having held off on buying a lot of media coverage up until very recently. How do you think strategy has changed this year?
Yeah, well, to me, this is primarily indicative of the digital era that we're in right now. I think in the past, there's been almost a surprise and manipulative delight in uncovering something about a candidate and pushing that out so that it can be realized. But with the ubiquity of information in the digital era, it's less of that game of what can I find and uncover and put out. So you see a little less of the mudslinging going on between the candidates and political advertisements. That being said, I think there's also, you hinted to this, the scrutiny around money in general in this election. You know, a lot of talk particularly has been spent on Trump and how he's funded his campaign thus far, and I think candidates are very aware of the scrutiny around what money they're using and how they're using it. And I do think it's a smart move to have moved a little bit away from some of the advertisements of past elections. That being said, I think that they're doing what they're not doing in advertisements in the debates. I think we've seen a lot of what traditionally might be seen in negative advertising in debates, which has caught a lot of people by surprise and also led to what you were mentioning with the increased coverage, particularly of Trump's campaign. And I foresee this continuing, this especially if moving on with Trump, but seeing this on the debate floor, I think is really going to be what we're in for.
And how have candidates been incorporating social media into their campaigns this year, and is it working?
Yeah, I think if this election has taught us anything, it's that candidates have a very different sense of what working means. I think that Trump's Facebook post for Cinco de Mayo is pretty indicative of that. That being said, I think that the real craftsmanship of campaign marketing comes in how you handle unanticipated or unintended effects of campaign messaging. I think, you know, an example of that, when Hillary launched her Instagram presence and the first photo was of a rack of pantsuits, was the intention tongue-in-cheek, or was messaging tailored after the fact to be poking fun at all of the conversations around her pantsuits? It's one of those, you don't really know what the intent was, but whether it works or not works in the way you intended, what are you going to do with that information? So is it working? I don't know. I mean, going back to the very beginning when logos came out, right? And Hillary's logo and Jeb Bush's logo were so attacked over social media. Okay, so did that work? Did that not work? I think we're really just in this election calling into question the old notion that all PR is good PR. And yes, candidates are getting people talking, and people who Trump loves to remind us, people who maybe haven't talked in the past. But is that a good thing? I don't know. I think we're a pretty divided camp on that, but it's certainly provided for most dramatic election.
Yeah. And looking ahead, what angles of attack can we expect to see in ads from Trump and from front-runner Hillary Clinton?
Yeah, so just previously talking about Trump and his tax views and new plans, I think that really alludes to an attack that's coming on incongruencies. We saw this a bit in some of the later GOP debates where Trump was, again, when all the questions, it seems like so many of the questions were tailored at Trump, and so many of those questions were about incongruencies in things that have been said. And I think that gets back to what we were talking about earlier in terms of the digital era and that everything is so accessible. I think because so much of what's been said is accessible, there's going to be a lot of finger pointing at incongruencies, because it almost feels like they each want to have something said about every topic, and then they want to go review it and audit for incongruencies. So that's definitely an attack I see coming. But apart from what's coming from each candidate and their individual campaigns, I think what's really exciting is what's coming from other sources. I think this is huge for social media right now. If you look at Snapchat, for the first time, has sponsored content in their Discover feature for Good Luck America. Facebook, huge deal going on with the scrutiny they're under for potentially suppressing conservative news, and what does that mean for their model and their stance as a social media forum. And I think that's going to be interesting. People always say it's not what you say, but how you say it. And in this situation, I think it's going to be how you're saying it in the form of where is it being said. And I think social media platforms are really coming into that. And even even not just where you're saying it or who else is saying it, but how are you getting audiences? You know, Cruz was under a lot of scrutiny for kind of the data practices of how he was getting friends of Cruz followers and accessing them even through their cell phones. So I think we're going to see in the campaigns a greater focus on almost behavioral targeting, whether that's through data or through these new social media platform features. I think it's going to be really interesting to see how that sort of analytic lens is incorporated into campaigns moving forward.
Okay, great. KK, thank you so much for being
Absolutely.
here.
Thanks for having me.
And now in international news, Sadiq Khan won the London mayoral election Saturday, making history as London's first Muslim mayor. Khan, a British Labour Party member, won by a narrow margin this weekend, making him one of the most prominent Muslim politicians in Europe. Only 3 days after taking office, Khan has already found himself engaged in conflict with Donald Trump, who, when asked about whether he would allow Khan to enter the country despite his proposed Muslim ban, said he would make an exception. Khan, however, was not impressed by Trump's so-called exception, replying, quote, "This isn't just about me, it's about my friends, my family, and everyone who comes from a background similar to mine anywhere in the world." Khan's election comes at a particularly contentious time for Muslims in the U.S., but even more so in Europe, where the significant Muslim minority has been facing backlash after the attacks in Paris and Brussels in the past year, as well as a steady flow of refugees fleeing the war in Syria. Time will tell what Khan's tenure will mean for Londoners, British Muslims, and the U.S. election, but Khan has already gone on record saying he supports Hillary Clinton for president. And that's our show tonight, folks. Thanks to our guests, Dominic Burke and KK Doyle. I'm Eric Miller, and you've been watching Politicat. Good night.